Let's get to Crystal Palace, who've been active in this window already, but will there be more activity? James Savundra will be speaking to Oliver Glasner later today. Hiya, James. The big question, of course, is Marc Guehi. Will Palace hold on to him this month, or will he be off?
Yes, Matt, good afternoon to you. It's always been a very real possibility that Marc Guehi would depart the football club in January, because we know he's only got 6 months left of his contract, and we know most of the big clubs in Europe want to try to sign Marc Guehi either as a free agent or in this transfer window. Most of those clubs prefer to sign him as a free agent rather than pay Crystal Palace a transfer fee for a player with 6 months left of his contract. But of all the different options in terms of clubs that want to sign Marc Guehi, it felt that Manchester City was the club with the immediate need, with the centre-back issues they're facing with. And so they've been weighing up whether or not to go in with a bid to try to tempt Crystal Palace, because we know Crystal Palace would be willing to consider bids lower than the £35 million which they originally agreed with Liverpool back on deadline day last summer. Now, we're waiting to get more information as to whether Manchester City have indeed willing to put together a bid to put to Crystal Palace. We have just seen Steve Parish depart the training ground a few moments ago. I'm not sure what the significance, if any, there is of that at all, but we know that Crystal Palace, because for a club like Crystal Palace, it's very difficult for them to let a player like Marc Guehi leave for free. A club of this stature shouldn't be letting players of that calibre leave the football club for free. So we wait to see whether or not Manchester City do come in with a bid. There has been reports elsewhere that they are preparing a bid between 30 and 40 million pounds to try to sign him this month. And then, of course, it's up to the player. Does he want to leave Crystal Palace now with the World Cup coming up this summer, or would he prefer to stay at Crystal Palace and assess all his options when he have plenty more options in the summer? He can pretty much pick what football club he wants to join in the summer. So this could accelerate really quickly, because we know Manchester City have a very real need for a centre-back with the issues they are facing with right now. And we know that Crystal Palace, whilst this transfer window is open, would be willing to consider offers. And Oliver Glasner has never given any assurances about whether or not Marc Guehi will be a Crystal Palace player following deadline day, which is coming up on February the 2nd.
Yeah, well, listen, Guehi is definitely the big one, but what about other movement? Could we see one striker in, one striker out this month?
Let's start with Jean-Philippe Mateta, because Juventus are interested in signing him this month, according to our colleagues at Sky in Italy. I've spoken to Crystal Palace sources. They say there's been no formal offer or any formal inquiries when it comes to Jean-Philippe Mateta. But once again, Crystal Palace would surely have to consider any sizable offers that came in for Jean-Philippe Mateta, because he's got 18 months left on his contract, and we understand that contract negotiations have stalled somewhat, and therefore they don't want to be in this situation they are with Marc Guehi with Jean-Philippe Mateta, whereby a world-class striker leaves the football club for free. So you think that if there was a sizable offer that came in from a club like Juventus, then it's something they would have to consider. Clearly, they don't want to lose him in this transfer window, because he's their top goal scorer by a million miles, and he could play a key role in them winning the Conference League and qualifying for Europe by their league place as well. In terms of players coming in, a player not seen as an immediate replacement for Jean-Philippe Mateta, but somebody who one day could lead the line for Crystal Palace is Sidiki Sharif. Now, Crystal Palace are confident of agreeing a deal with Angers, the French club, to sign the 19-year-old. They're looking to do a deal at less than the 25 million euros, which has been reported in France. He scored 4 goals already this season. Crystal Palace think he's a player that can come in and make an immediate impact, but definitely a player for the future. So Crystal Palace aren't seeing it as Jean-Philippe Mateta could depart and Sharif comes in and leads the line. Ideally, both players would be at the football club for the remainder of this season, and then in the summer I think you would be in a situation where Jean-Philippe Mateta is more likely to depart Crystal Palace. Once again, so much on the agenda for Oliver Glasner at his pre-match press conference. We'll be speaking to him at 1:30, and we'll bring that to you on Sky Sports News.
Very interested to hear what he's got to say. Thanks very much, James. Yeah, a lot of reports this lunchtime emerging around Marc Guehi's future. We are looking into those reports, and we're working to confirm what is happening. As soon as we get any information, we will let you know. But if he is sold in January, in the coming days, is the big danger for Crystal Palace. They're just not going to be able to find a replacement anywhere near his quality. It's hard enough in the summer to do that with someone like Guehi.
The reality is you're not going to replace Marc Guehi with 2 weeks left of a January transfer window. And if you are going to replace a Marc Guehi, it's going to cost you, by normal reckoning, around probably 80, 90 million pounds. So Crystal Palace is not going to do that. Marc Guehi's 25 years old. He's got so much ahead of him. He's so experienced for someone so young. A leader, a captain of Crystal Palace, left Chelsea at a young age because he wanted to pursue his career where he was guaranteed first team football. He's done that. He's guaranteed himself a place in the England squad. He's probably one of the first names on the England team sheet now, and certainly on his way to the World Cup in the summer. You can't really replace him. So you've got to look and go, well, okay, what can they do? And well, one thing Crystal Palace have been good at is sensible signings. If you look at who they've got at the moment, JD Canvo came in, seems really impressive. When they signed Max Lacroix as well, he's really pushed on, become a very solid Premier League centre-back. Chris Richards improved so much. They've got Chadi Riyad, who they spent quite a bit of money on it. He's coming back now from a cruciate injury. He started his comeback recently for the under-21. So, look, they've got time. You would expect that they would have looked at replacements in January. They would have known that offers are going to be coming for Marc Guehi. They should have been preparing for that, and the likelihood is they would have been. So the next 2 weeks, if Marc Guehi does leave, it'll be all eyes on Crystal Palace to see who they're looking to bring in.
As James said there, quite rightly, 30, 40 million pounds for a player that's going to go for free in the summer is a lot of money for anyone, but especially
Loads
for Crystal Palace. But they've got a very important European campaign right now. If they win the Conference League, they are in the Europa League, which would be massive for Crystal Palace. Plus, there's the issue of where you finish in the Premier League table. It's worth about £3 million per place. So you could say you finish 5 places ahead of where you pounds. That's just a theory of where you could finish.
But then they're getting 30 million right now. They're getting
he could help you get through to the Europa League.
Absolutely, I understand that. But also, if the player sees this as an opportunity himself, the ball's in Marc Guehi's court, really, in terms of if he really wants to make the move and push that forward, he will do. Let's not forget, he was very, very close to departing the club in the summer. It was only a deadline day U-turn at the last minute that meant he didn't move to Liverpool in the summer. I think Liverpool were the ones who are losing out most, actually, from this, because they were front runners in the summer. Now, Manchester City will gazump anything that I'm sure Liverpool will potentially propose to Marc Guehi. And also, Manchester City seems like a really good place right now. Experienced coach, one of the best in the world in Pep Guardiola, competing on all fronts. Once again, just signed Antoine Semenyo as well. They look stronger. Added to that back line, Manchester City are going to really be pushing Arsenal in the Premier League. Adds to their quality in the Champions League too, if he's able to join Manchester City in this window. And I say if, because we are waiting for more information on that. But likelihood is he could be leaving. And what a January transfer window for Manchester City that would be. And bear in mind, Pep Guardiola came out beforehand and said doesn't expect much business in January. All of a sudden, they've signed Antoine Semenyo and could well sign Marc Guehi in this window.
Yeah. So if Guehi does go, surely Crystal Palace will have to keep hold of Jean-Philippe Mateta, who has been linked with a move to Juventus. Andy Brassel joined us on Good Morning Transfers, and he says he thinks Mateta's future will be decided by what gives him the best chance of going to the World Cup.
Nothing's happening this month because for him, getting in the France squad is everything. And, quite apart from what Wilfried Zaha might have said or might not have said when they were both at Crystal Palace, getting there has really meant a lot to him. And everyone in France said when he got called up, going back to autumn, oh yeah, but when everyone's fit, he won't get in the squad. But he's done everything you need to do. He's taken the opportunities when he's been in the France team, and a little bit like Olivier Giroud back in the day, he's sort of planted a flag as I am a guy who's an alternative to all these other quick mobile forwards we have, be they Mbappe, Doué, Dembélé, who can play in all these different spots. I can be your reference point, your number 9. Mateta's doing everything you need to do. He'd be mad to do anything other than stay at Palace scoring in the Premier League this season. I'm not sure that the absolute top bracket of Premier League clubs is accessible to him. I don't think Juventus is a great spot for him because, of course, they've got in so many attacking players this summer. Of course, they'll probably lose Dusan Vlahovic in the summer, who's out of contract. But they've not really shown themselves as a place to really develop players in recent years. So with a year left and maybe a lower transfer fee, maybe there are more options for him over the continent.
We have been talking about Marc Guehi's future this lunchtime. Manchester City, one of the clubs that are seriously after him. Let's go there now and speak to Ben Ransom. Afternoon to you, Ben. Are there any developments this lunchtime? What's the latest?
Well, the latest is our understanding on the situation involving Marc Guehi and Manchester City is that City are stepping up their interest in the pursuit of Guehi in this window, a player that has emerged as their number one transfer target in terms of that central defensive recruitment. He's a player that we know Crystal Palace have obviously got great service out of, but he's also a player that almost left in the summer, as you've been discussing, to go to Liverpool. The fee at the time was around £35 million, and it's our understanding it would take a fee that was too good to turn down for Palace to sell him in this window. And from the player's perspective, we also understand it would take essentially an offer from Manchester City that would be too good for him to turn down when you consider he's got 6 months left on his Crystal Palace contract, which means that in the summer, given the size of the clubs that have had conversation with his representatives about signing him, we know that Bayern Munich, for example, one of those, the likes of Barcelona, Real Madrid have been closely monitoring his situation. The player himself can essentially write his own contract, can't he? The figures could be astronomical when you consider he'd be available on a free transfer in the summer. However, it feels as though this deal is getting a bit closer in this window, which would be a huge potential signing at this stage of the season for Manchester City, who are desperate for defensive reinforcements.
Yeah, you mentioned there that they would have to pay a little bit more in wages than they perhaps would do because they know that he can get incredible wages in the summer. Plus, they've got to fork out, 30-40 million potentially. So why do they need to do that right now? Why can't they wait till the summer?
Well, look, rewind 12 months, City went into the January transfer window and they spent bigger than they'd done previously in terms of both fees paid and also the number of players recruited. And within that spending, they brought in a couple of centre-halves, didn't they? Abdulkadir Kusanov arrived and also the youngster Vitor Reis. Now, that was because they had injury problems. They were trying to safeguard and plan for the future. Well, fast forward to where we are now, and all of a sudden we're in a similar defensive injury crisis when you consider they've lost Josko Gvardiol for what we expect to be at least the majority of the rest of this domestic season. He's also facing a race against time to be fit back in time to represent Croatia at the World Cup. Ruben Diaz, a player who has been alongside Gvardiol in that central defensive partnership right through this season, he's also out for another few weeks at least. And you consider how crucial a stage we're at. Nathan Ake, we know his fitness issues mean that he can't play twice within the same week. John Stones has been carrying injuries for such a long time. It's been such a frustrating period. City are down to the bare bones. Max Allain, the youngster, had to come back from his successful loan spell in the Championship with Watford, and he's been thrown straight back into the Premier League and both cup competitions. So they need numbers. The opportunity then to sign an England central defender, a player who is well versed in Premier League football, has a great deal of experience. His peak years ahead, a player that the club have scouted heavily, and a player they were interested in signing in the summer when his contract comes to an end. It's no surprise they've accelerated that interest in this window, and it represents a huge opportunity. Pep spoke about last year's January transfer window as being exceptional. He told me in at least one or two press conferences in the last few weeks that we're not to expect a similarly exceptional window from City. Well, you have to say, if they manage to sign Marc Guehi, the fact they've already got Antoine Semenyo for just shy of £65 million, a player who has started twice since his arrival, scored in both games from Bournemouth, another player who is up and running in terms of his Premier League experience and is already contributing, you'd have to say, Guehi and Semenyo in January, a notoriously difficult window, that will be beyond exceptional.
Are you going to be speaking to Pep Guardiola soon, Ben? He likes to keep his cards close to his chest. but do you anticipate it's going to be, 80-90% Guehi questions this time around?
Depends how brave the journalists in the room are feeling. We've all been on the receiving end of Pep keeping his cards close to his chest. We've all been told that we should speak to Hugo Viana, and he has nothing to do with transfers. I'm sure if we don't get anything from the club between now and then in terms of where that Guehi moves up to, it'll be similar. He won't want to talk about players from other clubs. He may be drawn into talking about the fact they're looking for central defensive reinforcements given the injuries, but I suspect it'll be pretty icy cool on transfers, and he'll be wanting to talk about the Manchester derby, because we can't ignore the fact there is a huge game in this part of the world happening tomorrow lunchtime. One of the oldest and best rivalries in the Premier League, and so much at stake for both clubs. Obviously, Michael Carrick taking charge of Manchester United back in a Premier League match. And for City, when you consider where the title race is at, it's a game they really do have to win to try and keep pace and keep the pressure on Arsenal at the top. So look, whatever happens, it'll be fascinating. And we will, of course, bring it to you here on Sky Sports News.
Looking forward to it. And all I can say is, Ben, good luck. Go well. Okay, I mean, look, if this does happen, Marc Guehi going to Manchester City this January, I know we've got 2 weeks to go, but is this very likely going to be the signing of the January transfer window, the big one?
Definitely. It's definitely going to be the one that people are going to be talking about more. I think because of the narrative, what happened in the summer with Liverpool, for Manchester City to then nip in January to take him off Liverpool's hands, it is a big turnaround, and Liverpool are the losers in this. They're the ones who will be very, very disappointed how this has ended up. The fans will be furious, I think, because of Liverpool's defensive frailties we've seen this season. The fact that they tried to sign him so late into the summer transfer window too showed how much they wanted him. For Manchester City, they've reacted to the injuries, as Ben was saying, to Vardiol, to Diaz, John Stones struggling to stay fit, Nathan Ake struggling to play twice in a week, and Stones has got a contract that runs out at the end of the season. Ake's got, I think, another year left, but he's coming to the end possibly of his time at Manchester City, and it's been a big rebuild for Manchester City. If we look at the players they've bought, if we look at the defenders, Victor Heiss, Kushinov, the come in young defenders, Aït-Nouri still pretty young. Marc Guehi, 25 years old, still on the young side, but so experienced for that age, can really help to step into that void. That Ruben Diaz has been there a long time as well, experienced, but they need to look for the future. And it feels like a head like Marc Guehi on his shoulders is a perfect fit for that Pep Guardiola side.
You said it there, 25 years old. You think of Marc Guehi and you think he's older than that because he's been around for so long, and he's been a key part of Crystal Palace for a while now.
When you speak to him as well, he's got a head on his shoulders, an old head on his shoulders. I've been speaking to him now for probably since he's been at Crystal Palace. We've had many sit-down interviews. Every time at the training ground, he always comes over and says hello. He's so professional. He's honest, genuinely one of the nicest guys you'll meet in football, but he's just got such a head on his shoulders. If you think about what happened in the summer with Alexander Isak refusing to train, Victor Gyökeres refusing to train for Sporting, wanting to push forward his moves, Marc Guehi didn't do that. He turned up at training every single day. He played in the games, gave 100%, still captain that side, never shifted away from his responsibilities at his club. That's the professionalism you want at your club, and that will be a future Manchester City captain, no doubt about it, if they can get it over the line. But that's City showing their cards, and also for the player, you can see a team wants you in January. To pay £30 million when you could get him for free in the summer is showing how much they want him, and that must be really appealing.
Is it still a snip, though? As I said, 25 years old, you're paying £40 million for him, proven Premier League player. Even that, is that still a bargain for anyone who buys him for that price?
Yes and no. So yes, if we're looking at a player 25, England international, still time to improve the quality that Marc Guehi's got. But as a club and as the financial part of the club, you've got to look at the fact he's out of contract 6 months and we could save £30 million, but they're getting a march on their rivals. And there's a queue of clubs who would love to have Marc Guehi. Liverpool, we know of their interest. Bayern Munich have been monitoring and trying to speak to the player. They could speak to the player in this month too. But Manchester City seem to have taken a leap on all of them. So, yes, in the grand scheme of things, you'll look back and go, what a great deal. But 6 months left on his contract is still a lot of money to spend. But if he brings them Premier League glory, maybe Champions League glory or trophies this season, it'll be money well spent.
Okay, well, it hasn't happened just yet, but a reminder of our breaking news. Manchester City are stepping up their interest in signing Marc Guehi.